morning. Convening our hearing on November 17th, 2021. It is 10 o'clock a.m. for the House Investigative Committee to investigate compliance with audit numbers 19-12 and 21-01. With me today in the room, present
Recording in progress.
With me in the room today is Vice Chair Linda Ichiyama, Chair David Tarnas, Chair Dale Kobayashi, and Representative Val Okimoto. We may have other members joining us in via Zoom. What did I just say? Oh my goodness. Representative Amy Perruso. We may be having other members join in via Zoom or in person. So on our agenda today is testimony to be received from the following witnesses: Mary Alice Evans, ex officio member of the Agribusiness Development Corporation Board of Directors, and Mr. Kaleo L. Manuel, ex officio member of the Agribusiness Development Corporation Board of Directors. They are here today to testify on the response and follow-up of ADC Board of Directors to report number 21-01, and to comment and to provide testimony on the ongoing operations, management, and oversight of the ADC. Before we start, members, I just want to make a couple of preliminary opening remarks just to kind of set the stage for the testimony we are taking today. In the ADC audit, 21-01, the primary findings as related to the Board of Directors was that there was minimal guidance to and oversight provided to ADC. As part of this finding of minimal oversight was several sub-findings: the lack of clarity on policies behind delegations of authority, finding that the ADC board members were doing staff level work, that there was little to no participation in land acquisition, and it was more of a formality. And a final sub-finding that the Board of Directors provided very little to no oversight of the Executive Director, allowing the Executive Director to operate with little to no accountability. So those were the findings that we will be exploring, but I think we'll also be exploring other areas that were not touched upon by the audit, including the broader findings about the authorizing enabling legislation of the statute, questions about strategic planning process, as well as the issues surrounding Kauai, both as a challenge and as a model, as a potential model for management of lands and water systems across the state, which is the primary responsibility of ADC. Finally, we are going to also go into some questions about probably the audit process and the ongoing audit process as represented by the financial audits. Members, that's just an overview. So to get started, what we'll do first is we'll swear in our testifiers, and if they could please stand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. And just for the record, to note that Ms. Evans and Mr. Manuel did answer in affirmatively to that oath. So I'm going to allow our guests today to first provide some introductory comments about themselves and perhaps their role on ADC. And we'll start first with Ms. Mary Alice Evans. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair and members. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm a longtime state employee. I think I'm going on 48 years. So I have served on a number of boards as either a ex officio member or a designated alternate. I served on the ADC board for 2 periods. One is from 2011 to 2014. From 2015 to 2019, the director of DBED appointed a different alternate, so I took a 4-year break. And then the current DBED director appointed me as the designated alternate from 2019 to the present. I believe that what I bring to the board is several things. One is that the Office of Planning and Sustainable Development understands that agriculture is a constitutional priority, that 45% of the state is in the state ag district, but that agriculture is a hugely challenging business. Some of the factors that made it very successful in the late 1800s and the first half of the 1900s have changed dramatically. Sugar was a huge export industry for us, but the last probably 30 years, it was supported by congressionally imposed trade tariffs. It could not have been competitive without those tariffs that made foreign sugar, kept at parity with foreign sugar prices. It lost that when, as I understand, and this is anecdotal, the food industry lobbyists got more powerful than the sugar industry lobbyists and convinced Congress to remove those tariffs. So agriculture that we can do here in the state without that kind of federal congressional assistance, we have fewer tools. We have some tools. We can make land less expensive for farmers. We can make water less expensive for farmers. We don't want to make wages, low wages for farmers. That would be contrary to, I think, to everything that I believe in, and I'm sure you do too. They need to have a living wage. But then the cost of capital is something that we can help them with by making low-cost loans available. So those are great tools to have, but they're no way do they, they're not the same as what made sugar so successful in mid-century 19. So that's part of why I think I can add some value to the board. As you know, the board is comprised by statute of 3 ex officios and 8 appointees with experience in business and the agricultural industry. And our goal is to make commercial agriculture successful. So thank you very much for letting me share my values.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. Mr. Manuel?
Aloha mai kako, Clem Manuel. I currently serve as the Deputy Director with the Commission on Water Resource Management in that position since 2019. And Chair Case has appointed me as Delanar's designee to sit on EDC. Prior to my current position, I was with the Department of Fine Homelands for almost 10 years, running our planning office, which did a lot of land use environmental planning, community engagement, etc. I was a lead on developing our water policy plan for that agency. So a lot of my expertise that I bring to the board revolves around land use planning and water resource management. And is usually kind of the context of how I engage with presentations before the board and provide that kind of expertise. Also to kind of have a voice related to, climate uncertainties, land and natural resources, traditional customary practices. And then just as an ex-official member, as Mary Alice said, just understanding overall government process, providing guidance to the rest of the board on how we engage most effectively in that process. So quick summary of who I am. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Manuel. So members, there's no formal presentation and we're going to just jump into questions. And why don't I just start first with the area of the authorizing enabling legislation. I think Ms. Evans, you commented a little bit about how the global economy has changed around agriculture since the time of the sugar plantations. I think some of the criticisms that we've seen leveled at ADC is that their enabling legislation is so broad. From your perspective as a board member, and this will be the same question for Mr. Manuel, from your perspective as a board member, where do you think we need to maybe help focus the agency by reevaluating the authorizing enabling legislation? I'll go first to Ms. Evans.
Thank you. I really appreciate that question. I think the purpose and findings and purpose section of the statute needs to reflect the current realities of agriculture today. In 1994, I think there was a wonderful optimism that that there might be a way to revitalize agriculture. With 45% of the acreage of the state in the state ag district, agriculture has played a huge part in our history. But as you know, a lot of that land is not good for commercial ag. And a lot of our farmers are subsistence farmers. But I think ADC specifically can focus on supporting commercial agriculture, agriculture that has the potential for to generate income that will support a farm with either value added or export potential. I personally, this is my personal opinion, don't think that Hawaii will be able to ever export commodity agricultural products like sugar was and pineapple was. But I think there is a lot of potential, and ADC can foster that with land. And that's why I disagree. This is my personal opinion. It doesn't reflect the board's opinion. That the auditor missed an opportunity in his audit to look at our land banking activities, which are directed by the legislature, as a positive tool that ADC can fulfill for the state to create land, good land, that can support commercial agriculture. So I think, maybe that could, because that's not clear in the statute, maybe that could be something that could be clarified. I think private lands, even in the ag district, are way too expensive for farmers. They cannot afford the land prices that current ag lands sell for, because with that much land in the agricultural district, residential uses have proliferated over the years, and that drives up the price of land. So I think that would be areas I might suggest as ways to amend the statute to bring it up to current times. I'll leave the water issues to Kaleo.
Mr. Manuel, the baton is passed to you.
Mahalo for the opportunity. In kind of prepping for this and rereading the enabling legislation and kind of reevaluating where we're at today, I think there is good opportunity to, as Mary Alice had said, make ADC relevant with our current times, and then also to look to the future and really determine where we want to go as a state as it relates to agribusiness. But one of the things I think we need to really think through too is where there's potential duplication of efforts and overlap, and it's not really clear in the statute. I think we could benefit from understanding, okay, what role does DOA play in conjunction with ADC, in conjunction with UHC2R, in conjunction with USDA federal programs. We know, just listing a few, right? And then there's the private sector. So I think kind of working through those overlaps and relationships would help us all understand our roles more clearly. I think maybe something to consider too is export is elevated in the legislation originally, and so as Mariana said, it's getting to a competitive export market is maybe challenging. I think that's something that we can maybe potentially pursue, but I think with COVID and everything that we're currently dealing with, there's been a resurgence of doubling local food production. And just serving our community first. And maybe that's something that could be considered and rebuilt into new legislation. Again, I'll highlight climate uncertainty and land and water resources are going to be put under pressure, I think, in our near future. And so we should bring data sets that we know or projections that we see on the horizon coming. And build that into the legislation and try to make it realistic and develop, metrics that we can kind of achieve collectively. I'll stop there. I think that's kind of my initial review of potential recommendations for legislative amendments.
So on this topic, members, I'm going to open it up to further questions, and we'll just go through our order. The next topic, and we'll go through these. We have 2 hours, members. There's a lot of topics, but I don't, let's try to go through these systematically so that the record is clean. Representative Okimoto, Representative Kobayashi, you're up first.
Thank you, Chair. For Mary Alice, I guess part of it is, I think, might be that the audio is kind of difficult for me. I can't really hear, but could you clarify that when describing some of the problems at ADC, that you chose to bring out that the auditor somehow missed an opportunity to fix things. So that is really your opinion on the biggest problem, is that the auditor audited and they did not, I guess, in your view, take advantage of certain opportunities. Or maybe you could elaborate on that, why that is like the biggest problem.
Representative Kobayashi, I'm not sure that would be the biggest problem, but I just did disagree with the auditor on some of the findings. I think he was dealing with the statute as it was written in 1994 and amended in 1999, and I think failed to take into account that was a long time ago, and that there have been huge changes in the industry. And I think that, it would have been helpful or more helpful to ADC, its board and its staff to have acknowledged some of those changes and the fact that the board and the staff have to deal with circumstances and opportunities as they exist today, rather than as they existed in 1994.
So that's to say that had an audit not be scheduled, there'd be no opportunity to find out anything wrong over there, because that's really our one opportunity and we blew it, is what you think? So there's no responsibility of anybody else, the board or management, to find out these issues. It's solely the problem of the auditor to find all these things if and when we choose to do an audit.
My understanding is that the state auditor has a 10-year rolling schedule for doing program audits, and that every state program will eventually come up on that schedule, so that it's, and it is up to the legislature, of course, to guide and direct the state auditor in the audits that they believe are the most important priorities.
So that's not what I was really asking about. It's just your comment that that is our sole mechanism for finding out any problems here is those periodic audits, and not any oversight by the board or management.
Oh,
Kind of what more the gist of my issue is.
No, I think the board does have an obligation to, identify problems and to look for changes that will address those problems. And I believe it's the board's responsibility through their executive director to inform the legislature of problems that are beyond the program's ability to address, given the resources and the statutory direction that they have. So I think it isn't, just the auditor, it's the board, it's the staff, and our ability to communicate with the legislature because, my personal view is that the legislature is our board of directors.
So, and in that context, in your opinion, the board fulfilled their responsibilities related to the problems we're discussing here. And there's still only the auditor's lack of looking at what you felt was the most important issues that represented the lost opportunity. I'm just really having a hard time understanding this.
That was what I said. I think it's a missed opportunity.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any other questions for you.
I apologize. We do have Chair Hashem on Zoom. So Chair, we're talking on the subject matter of enabling legislation for ADC, if you have any questions on that subject matter.
No, not right now. I will yield my questions, my time.
Okay, next up is Representative Tarnas.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome. Thanks for all of you for being here today. In terms of this, it's clear that we've got to update the statute. I mean, it was written in '94 and things have changed a lot. It would have been really helpful if we had an analysis from your board about the statute, about what needs to be updated, because this is not new. Obviously, you've been grappling with this for a long time. Has the board discussed the statute and what needs to be updated in any of the time that you've spent on the board? Because this is not new.
Thank you, Representative Tarnas. Yes, I have raised that concern at, I think, several board meetings because, it seems, this is a strange way to put it, but I think it seems a little unfair to me that the board and the program has a enabling statute that does not recognize the changes that have happened since 1994.
Yeah, maybe just add, we as a board haven't had a specific item to evaluate or recommendations from staff presented to us on where they would like to see amendments made. Usually they're tied to individual submittals that come before us as a board, and then anecdotally tying back, well, the enabling legislation says this. And so there's some dialogue about potential changes or recommended amendments. I don't know if we've tracked those comprehensively to come up with a report to say, okay, this is the board's position on potential amendments.
Okay, all right, and that, go ahead, please, Mary Alice.
I agree with Kalea.
And I guess the other thing that would have been helpful or for us as we look to modify the statute is, if the ADC had done a strategic plan so that you would have actually gone through and done this, as you know, I mean, you're both planners, you evaluate what's changed and then you adapt to it. And so I think we'll address the strategic plan issue in questions that are a little bit further down on our agenda, but those are, I appreciate your comments though, that you did bring it up, but there wasn't any comprehensive or systematic discussion about changes to the statute, but you recognize that it needs to be done. Okay, back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Representative Perruso.
Thank you. And thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time. So I do have a couple of follow-up questions. First, for Ms. Evans, you made a distinction or you created a dichotomy between commercial and subsistence agriculture in response to the question about enabling legislation. And I was wondering, I was seeking more clarification because I think that, so around the terminology of commercial agriculture, there can be some connotations of, I would say, large scale, industrial, maybe monocrop, agriculture, but I don't think those are necessarily included in the term commercial. And also kind of connotations, I think, yeah, just about size. And I know this has been part of the conversation at ADC around the size of the parcels and the conditions of the license agreements. So I think this terminology in the enabling legislation about what kind of agriculture we're supporting, and you are making an argument, and I think that I've also heard it in the board conversations when I've attended the meetings, that the purpose of ADC is to support commercial agriculture. So I am wondering, are you also saying that it should be simply to support large scale agriculture? Because I think small farmers can also be commercially engaged. So I was wondering about your thoughts on that.
Yes. I talked to Dean Nick Comerford before today to get his thoughts. And he made a strong point. He said, farm size is not how many acres, it's how much gross income the farm earns. So small farms can be very successful and productive, but I think you, and particularly in the neighbor islands, are aware there's really a strong demand for agricultural land, for family farms, for farms that do not depend entirely on agricultural income, so that at least one, adult in the family works for cash in a non-farm way. And some farms are really evenings and weekends, but the farmers. So, but I think if the state wants to have a consistent production of local food or successful farming in our ag district, there is a need for supports. And that's why I think ADC was, so in some ways I agree with ADC's original goal of supporting commercial agriculture. I think there are supports for smaller subsistence farms, family farms, in other programs throughout the state. So we're looking for a niche that ADC can successfully fulfill, that is needed, then I think it's supporting commercial farms.
I have a quick follow-up on that. So just to follow up, and I have been thinking a lot about Kauai and ADC's presence in Kauai, and it is the vast majority of the lands controlled by ADC. And I would say most of the lands that are in production are on Kauai. And yet, of the 12,000 ADC acres on Kauai, 8,000 roughly are tillable. And of that, we only have the kind of farming that you're describing on about a little bit more than 2,000 acres, almost, well, maybe closer to 2,500 acres. So I would say that if we're just going to use that model that ADC has really constricted themselves to, the large parcels, the big industrial ag, then we may not be able to find those folks, those large scale folks, to farm that land. We're not optimizing our use of the land on Kauai, clearly. So I would urge you to kind of rethink or like continue to consider the restrictions around the size of the parcel available to farmers. That's
Thank you. Good point. Thank you.
Okay, we have Representative Yamashita who joined us via Zoom. Representative Yamashita, did you have any questions on this issue of enabling legislation for ADC? And if not, we will move on to Representative Ichiyama for any questions on this area. Nothing? Okay, I'd like to follow up because it's along the lines of Representative Perruso's question. And I heard in Mr. Manuel's previous comments about how there has been more focus on local food production. So I guess, when you think about large commercial in the sense of sugar and pineapple, that's large commercial export. But maybe is there a place for commercial food production, local food production? And can you expand upon that and how that might be something that we can bake into the enabling legislation? I'll address that question first to Mr. Manuel.
Okay, I will try. I'm no ag expert again. But I participating in, Sustainable Hawaii Initiative goals, the Aloha Plus Challenge, which was just brought up yesterday in our commission meeting. We've developed these metrics of success, and they're at various scales, right? There's local, national, international scales. And I think this initial statute kind of talks about it, but it doesn't provide necessarily where we want to prioritize. And I do think that's a job of the board to kind of help to prioritize that. I do think that getting back to local commercial market, there's obvious need. Working with homestead farmers on the Big Island, there's some really productive farms on homestead land, for example. It depends on who you talk to. They'll tell you, if I grow it, I can sell it because we just have a market for different types of crops. So there is that opportunity locally, I think, to help reduce the amount of imported kind of products that we're purchasing and really fill niches here and there. Maybe something to tag off of, and just while it's on my mind, was, we throw terminology around really loosely, and I think we should really start to focus in. Is it commercial farm? Is it size? Is it gross income? Right? Is it, every level of government uses different terminology. And I think we start talking the same language, we'll be able to clearly communicate expectations. Right now, I don't feel like we're using the same terminology. For example, gentleman farms, right? Or, luxury farms. And that's one of the issues that come up, right? At almost every single county. We just had a submittal before us yesterday looking at Makakilo and a farm community there. Is it, so the commission, our water commission, is questioning now, how do we balance land use and water resource availability to support true, but then what is true ag? Those are real hard policy we really need to have as a collective, and be very about expectations and terminology, because I get confused in sitting at the same table on when you say commercial ag, specifically you're saying, or when you say diversified ag. What does that mean? That was one of my questions when I first came on the board. We give certain rates for diversified per acre versus other types of rates. So what is the what are the definitions we're using in the terminology? I think it's very helpful for us. Sorry, kind of long answer.
Anything to add to that?
No, I agree completely.
If there's no further questions on this area of enabling legislation, go ahead, follow up.
Being a planner, and I'm talking to other planners here across the table, you'd mentioned, Kaleo, about including some metrics in the statute. I love that idea. And I would be very interested in your opinions on what kind of metrics those might be, any best practices, because I know you're working on the same thing in your other role.
I don't have specifics right now, but one of the questions, I just use Sustainable Hawaii Initiative, double local food production. Well, what is the base? I think that's come out. What are we currently producing? And then what is that doubled? We don't really have a grasp around collectively. ADC is just one piece of the agricultural puzzle. Who aggregates that data set? And so I think Aloha Plus Challenge and some of these organizations that everyone's rallied around have some way to track and measure that, but tying into that may be useful. I think it depends again on the policy that's set, and then what metrics of success we really want to develop around that. I think it will help us to kind of determine what success looks like and then how to get there. So as a board, there's a little bit more guidance on the overall policy and trajectory of where we want to go with ag. But I don't have specifics right now. I would be uncomfortable kind of putting metrics out there.
No, that's fine. And I think perhaps metrics are often laid out in the plan itself rather than the statute, because you do want to have the ability to modify them as you move along. And you do want to collaborate with others who are gathering data. And so you have to be agile that way. So when we come to the discussion about the plan, let's talk about this a little further. Back to you, Chair.
So let's jump actually to that strategic planning process, because that was a major finding in the auditor's report that ADC lacked plans. Ms. Evans, can you speak to the strategic planning process as you understand it, both as a former board member in the 2014, and then time when you were there, as well as just the ongoing strategic planning process that ADC is now engaged in since the audit?
Let me make sure I understood your question, Chair. You're asking if there was a strategic planning process that preceded the audit.
Yes.
I would say no. I would say that the board has made significant progress on that audit recommendation since the audit came out. And that is certainly, that's a unanimous action and goal for the board. We passed unanimously a new mission statement and a goals, objectives, and actions statement in August. In my view as a planner, that does need more work. And it may be that we'll continue to add to that. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that does. Mr. Manuel, from your perspective, you're just a current, you just recently got onto the board. So from your view, how is the strategic planning process unfolding? Is it moving at the clip that you folks need? Do you think that the ADC is sourced up to be able to conduct its strategic planning process?
Yeah, all of the questions. I think as Mary Alice highlighted, the board did review and approve kind of the mission, goal, vision of the current strategic plan, agribusiness plan as drafted. I again, as Mary Alice said, I think as a planner, we can do more to create more robustness around this plan. But it's a good start, right? It's a start that was presented by staff. And when I asked staff, what was the process? As planners, we are involved and care about process just as much as the plan itself. And so it was an internal plan. It was developed by staff and by the executive director, and that was clarified for the board. And I think, again, it shows where staff and executive director have, with board guidance and board action, have kind of prioritized and looked at establishing and setting goals. We collectively as a board have taken action to develop a PIG, a permanent, I don't know that. Permitted interaction group. Thank you. PIG is so much easier. Specifically to help guide this plan implementation and review the policies of the board related to that. We did discuss about adding the strategic plan as another PIG to kind of help put meat on the bones. But at this point in time, with staff, limits and capacity, they were concerned about having and forming that. I have recommended and kind of stand behind it is we could and should look at hiring consultants to provide planning expertise. We don't have a planner on staff. I know that's one of our vacancies, but we could hire consultants to help us develop that, and then bring and develop that process, engage with various stakeholders, and then again put more metrics into the plan itself, because that was one of the questions I had, that we don't really have timeframes associated with it, budget tied to each of these actions, leads, partners, etc. That good kind of strategies kind of have in place. So there's definitely, it's the start. We're not there yet, and I'm hopeful with this board and the focus of Chair Lau that we'll get some energy around that.
And we will have Chair Lau tomorrow, members, to further discuss this. I'll open up now to questions around the strategic planning process that any members might have. So Chair Hashem, you're up first. Any questions around this area?
No, Chair.
And Representative Kobayashi.
No question.
Representative Yamashita. And we'll go to our resident planner, Chair Tarnas.
Thanks. Mary Alice, you were on the board previously, and I know you must have brought up, questions about where's our plan? What are we working off of? I mean, why wasn't there a plan done? Can you help me understand that? Because it just doesn't seem like you would be able to operate an organization like ADC without a clear, call it a strategic plan, agribusiness development plan, whatever. I'm sure you must have brought it out. Why wasn't there a plan?
Well, and this is my personal opinion.
Understood.
The staff is very limited. When you have a land management charge, in my experience, that tends to take priority over any activities that are conceptual or analytical. When I was deputy of DBID, some of our programs manage land or manage tenants. There's always a crisis. And so I noted, and others have noted, that when you have you have lands or programs to manage, tenants especially, you will spend all of your time trying to solve those problems because they're immediate and critical. And so if you have a limited staff and you don't have a planner on board, it'll be who doesn't have to go out and make sure that the water's flowing or the fence is fixed, or that the police are on site to try to get rid of the chop shop kind of thing. That's when you'll have an opportunity to create a plan. This is not just ADC. I see this in other programs where there is a land management charge. You have to separate planning from that more immediate and more urgent charge that you're responsible for.
So that's why there is a planner position, right? And so what's been the problem with hiring it? Why? Do you have any idea about why you haven't been able to get a planner?
No, I don't.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Rep Perruso.
Thank you. So I have a couple of questions. The first is about the strategic planning process. The first is about the strategic planning process. And I'm not sure if it'd be expedient to begin that process prior to our legislative conversation about enabling legislation. So if the statute changes, then the strategic plan might change. But I did wonder if you folks have considered a process that involves more of the community and the stakeholders. I know the Board of Agriculture reaches out to stakeholders. They have small group interactions and get input and feedback. And I did not get the impression that that was the way in which this strategic plan was developed. And I am fairly certain that there wasn't any outreach to community because my community is directly affected and would have been very engaged in that conversation. So I'm wondering about, those two things.
Representative, I completely agree with you. A strategic plan should have community engagement. Land issues on Oahu are of interest to all communities, and they're very intense about it. If you've served on a neighborhood board or attended a neighborhood board, you know how much people passionately care about what's happening in their community to land. And so any I believe, and personally, that the next step for the ADC board is to hold community listening sessions in the two areas where we have lands, to hear what people would like to see. What are their hot buttons? What are their sore toes? Where would they want to see ADC go with its land management and policies? Thank you for that question. I really appreciate that opportunity to say that.
Yeah, and maybe just to add, Perruso, the timing and design of process is really important, right? So I think the strategic plan came and we have something drafted, and it was an internal attempt to kind of get something on paper, some trajectory, and then the board's blessing it right now with its approval. If this body does obviously look at the enabling legislation and edit it or amend it, then we would have to revisit whether or not the strategic plan is in alignment or not with our naming policy, right? So I think right now, within the current framework, this is kind of what we presented, and then we should look at ways that we can design a process that's inclusive of community, stakeholders, and is consistent with the statute. So timing will kind of dictate what happens. I don't see us totally revamping and designing a process between now and potentially then throughout legislative session. So I think there's time for us to think through how that can be best rolled out and developed.
A different question. So, but kind of connecting the strategic plan back to the enabling legislation of the statute, and then also the Aloha Plus challenge language. And I'm wondering if you think that we should be keeping that language in mind as we redesign the statute, and then also hopefully that would help structure the strategic plan. Because so just coming fresh from a conversation with young people about the climate crisis, I feel like all of our energy needs to be directed towards that particular problem. And I think that we have an opportunity here with planning around agriculture to do some really good work. And I'm wondering if you have that discussion on the board, like if that is something the board talks about.
I'd love to answer that question, Chair. Is that all right?
I think that's right up your alley, Ms. Evans.
So, as the co-chair of the Climate Commission and the chair of the Greenhouse Gas Sequestration Task Force, which has a charge from the legislature to look at how carbon sequestration and can be done in both natural and working lands. And of course, ADC is all about working lands. Also, our office, the Office of Planning and Sustainable Development, completed the 2050 Sustainability Plan update and presented it to the legislature and the community and stakeholders. And it has sections based on the United Nations SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, on food, our food systems, and how to make them more sustainable. So I feel very strongly about those issues, and I do think that you can have commercial agriculture that is sustainable. And of course, there's a large role for organic agriculture in Hawaii. And that has to be included in what the ADC does support and encourage. Thank you.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I think maybe just to add, as I think our current ag business plans highlights, there's a lot of strategy and plans that are done, right? And a lot of times we forget about those efforts, and then you frustrate community by going out again. And they said, I told you in 2017, I told you in 2008. So I think it's really, really responsible for us as agency to not forget those voices, build upon them, and then connect into a lot of these local, national, international goal sets. So there's a natural alignment, right? That just creates synergy. And so oftentimes I think when we think we have to do it alone and we have to do it independently, I think that's a flaw. I think we can look at Aloha Plus, we can look at SDG, the Climate Commission, and find ways to plug into them in designing what does Agribusiness Development Corporation's strategic plan look like in alignment with all those moving pieces here in Hawaii.
Thank you.
Representative Ichiyama.
Chair. If you could help me understand a little bit more about the strategic planning process, because I'm hearing you folks say that the planning position at ADC has not yet been filled, and that Kaleo, you mentioned, you know, the idea of hiring a consultant. Maybe this is the best put to you, Mary Alice, as your OP hat, your Office of Planning hat. Does Office of Planning assist other agencies with these types of planning efforts, or really is it an internal agency thing within itself?
Thank you, Representative. So the Office of Planning and Sustainable Development does now have the statewide sustainability coordinator, Danielle Bass, and she has brought to the Office of Planning and Sustainable Development a stronger awareness of how we can, as an office, support agencies like ADC and other state agencies. The Office of Planning and Sustainable Development has also, thanks to the legislature, has now got the Environmental Review Program, which used to be the former OEQC program. And I'm in a huge learning curve on how Chapter 343 impacts, you know, our awareness of where environmental issues are well done and where we need, you know, additional improvement. We have a program that does reviews the petitions to the Land Use Commission for district boundary amendments. That's kind of where Kaleo was mentioning that there is a lot of competition for good ag land, and not all of it is for agricultural uses. I think, as you all know, on Oahu, the competition for ag land for solar arrays to replace the coal plant that is going out of operation in fall 2022 has put a huge spotlight on, you know, what are our priorities for the ag district? Do we use it for solar arrays? Do we use it for wind turbines? Can we combine that with agriculture? And the other competition for that is affordable housing. So in the Office of Planning and Sustainable Development, we try to provide, look for a balance and look at priorities, and it changes, you know, dramatically. So there's not one answer forever, but there is an opportunity there to help find that balance. And sitting on the ADC board gives me an opportunity to learn about some of the challenges, and the Board of Agriculture. I'm also the designated alternate for the DBED director on the Board of Agriculture, which gives me a chance to see how challenging agriculture is and how easy it would be to allow most of our ag district to become, you know, other uses. So, does that answer your question, Representative?
Yes, it is very helpful. Thank you. You want to add something?
Maybe just to add that, you know, if you, you know, coming from two agencies, unless you have a planner on staff or, you know, a planning function, it's really hard to make planning a priority or a focus. And even if you can contract that out to a planning firm or a consultant, reviewing their submittals and what they send to you, you really are putting a lot of faith in what they're sending to you as like a legit plan. And so it is something that, you know, agency by agency, it's the prioritization of, you know, how staff are hired and whether or not planning is a core function of your agency. I think it's critical as a planner. I always advocate for that. But yeah, partnering with other agencies like OP that have these larger policies and statewide frameworks to implement is always helpful. You know, even connecting to them and seeing how OP can support, I think would be a great opportunity, especially with sustainability as a core function now of Office of Planning.
I just think we have so many resources in Office of Planning and Sustainable Development that I'd like to take advantage of them, our own in-house state expertise, you know, and not necessarily have to rebuild the wheel, reinvent the wheel. I think that would be helpful. I think also what I see as needed in the strategic plan is if you read the strategic plan, it refers to a lot of what Department of Ag is doing, right? And so I think there could be a more deeper conversation about the roles of the two agencies. And I would like to see that be further fleshed out in planning or planning. I'm not sure how that would come about, but that would be my request. Thank you, Jen.
I'm going to follow up on that question and maybe be more pointed. If we were to direct OPSD, and I'm going to start using that new acronym, OPSD, Office of Planning and Sustainable Development. Is that the new acronym? Okay, OPSD. If we were to direct that, I would imagine that you're going to say, you're going to need to give us more funds or another person. So what does that look like, Ms. Evans, for your office if we were to try to maybe bolster a little bit? Because I don't know that a planner in perpetuity in ADC is necessary. And maybe can we have a little bit of a discussion on that? So if we were to direct OPSD to do it, what kind of resources would you be looking at needing?
I would love to answer that question. We have requested through the governor's budget preparation process additional positions for our sustainability program. We have only one person now. She's amazing and does a tremendous amount, but in order to provide additional capacity to advise other state programs on how to be more sustainable, I believe that, and I've advocated for additional staff for that program. And that's one where I don't think we're going to find federal funds. I also think that federal funds, as you know, tend to be short-term. And so you complete a project for, you know, that the federal government has awarded you funds for, and then that's, you know, then it's over. And so I'm hopeful that I have an opportunity to make that request to the legislature. It'll depend on whether the governor includes my ask in his supplemental budget request.
And in these positions, so, you know, our challenge always is, and we're not going to grow government, you know, every department wants more.
Yes.
What is the, you know, is it one position, two positions? And then is the concept going to be, so what I'm seeing and hearing, or what I would like to see maybe, is that yes, OPSD has all these, this expertise, right? If you become someone that's integrated into all of these agencies and helps be that convener, that crosstalker almost, that, you know, that might be an investment that makes a lot of sense for the legislature to make. But it's not going to be an investment of 10 people. You know, that's just, you know, but so can you, realistically, if you were to build this out, are you looking at 1, 2, 3 positions? Is there enough work for that person to do across agencies?
I do believe that there would be enough work. We look at sustainability in those 17 SDGs, and not all of them, of course, you know, so they're different priorities. And we've prioritized them in our 2050 sustainability plan into 8 focus areas. assisting, other state programs in those 8 areas does take, we have specific actions in the 2050 plan. Will take several people. I don't know how many I'll have an opportunity to request, and we'll take any amount. We'll be very grateful for any amount that the legislature is able to provide.
Khalil, I feel like you might want to respond to any of these
Well,
questions.
No,
And-
these are great. I'm really appreciating the conversation because we're elevating something very focused on agribusiness within the context and lens of sustainability, which is, tied to climate and everything else. So I'm as a planner seeing the frameworks and the networks of kind of connection of agency and policy, I think is phenomenal and would totally change how government works and functions. And does kind of emphasize the connection, right, between ag, water, energy, all of those moving pieces, and having some kind of convener or focused effort to that may get us more with less, potentially. So I just wanted to say, I think this is a great conversation.
Okay, Representative Perruso, since you have your
Yeah.
question, then we'll go back through the list one more time.
Okay, I just wanted to circle back to stay in the same topic area around planning. And, the Department of Agriculture has been asking us for more support around data collection. And we're hoping to have that proposal this coming session. But I'm wondering if that person, if they're working for the Department of Agriculture, then they're not, are they or are they not also going to be helping to collect data for ADC? Because I don't think, it's hard to plan without data. You're just talking.
That function, which the Department of Agriculture lost, I think in 2009, was depended on by pretty much every agency in the state that needed agricultural data for planning. It's sorely missed. And it hasn't been, it can't be recreated without at least a body to help with that. Matt Lowe at Department of Agriculture does his very best, but he's only one person. And so, we do share data across state agencies. As you know, the Office of Planning and Sustainable Development has the state's GIS program. Now, most land management departments have their own GIS as well, but our 3 hardworking people manage the enterprise license for ESRI and support those efforts to do geographic spatial analysis for every state department and the legislature. So I do believe it's possible to share data widely, but somebody does have to have that charge, has to collect it. And we do miss the agricultural statistics branch that hasn't been restored.
Maybe just to add, I think, government in general, we have our individual mandates, but to the extent that between boards or bodies, there's clear like MOU or MOA designed, and one of those components of MOAs or MOUs is usually data sharing. And these are the metrics and data that we're going to collect so that when we share that data, they're compatible and they talk to each other, or they're not duplicative, right? That's one of the benefits I've seen out of using MOAs and MOUs between agencies to make it very clear. We don't have people collecting data. Can you collect this data for us when you're doing your plans or your outreach or your surveys or coordinating on these larger surveys or census gathering, et cetera? That's always been really helpful for data sharing. So I just wanted to throw that out there maybe as another option.
OHA has convened a data governance working group. I was asked to participate. Their initial focus is on collecting more granular data around Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders. But I strongly support having a data governance policy that allows for sharing. This was a legislative initiative You know, it was, I believe, a House resolution, and it was a single House resolution. So OHA went ahead and initiated, but they invited a broad, you know, cross-section. You know, I asked if it would only be focused on Native Hawaiian, and they said, no, we see this as a broader issue that we can help with. So just to make the point that data sharing, as Kaleo said, is something that's top of mind, and there is a mechanism there. It's informal, but I believe it has ETS's involvement as well. And I think we'll be able to come out with a proposal that, you know, will then be vetted by the legislature and state departments, and may lead to a better system for doing that.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions on this area of strategic planning?
Just real quick, one question. Mary Alice, in your request to the governor, which I know you can't commit that it will actually be approved, did you ask for 3 positions in sustainable?
I asked for 5.
5, okay. I couldn't remember which one. Okay, thank you.
So the value of this committee is we have chairs that sit on various committees that have influence on all of this, as well as vice chairs. So one last question on the strategic planning from me, and a very specific question maybe for Mr. Manuel on timing. It connects and follows up on Representative Perruso's question. What is a good time frame we should maybe plan for a strategic plan to be done well, to engage community across the state? And to come up with a product that's workable, that we can look at, that we can feel confident in, knowing that at the same time ADC is doing all of the other things it needs to do, as well as initiating big plans and projects that are separately probably going to feed into that strategic plan or not. What kind of timeline should we look at?
As a planner, it's hard to commit to a timeline. To be honest, the procurement process alone takes months to get through, you know, getting the funding, going through procurement, scope negotiation, contracts. So having done that, that's 3 to 6 months alone. And then designing a process, and depending, usually I'm an advocate for co-design of planning processes with community. If you do that, then that process is usually longer than shorter. If you're wanting to actually have a community kind of co-design process. If I would say no shorter than 2 years. 2 years is kind of like a good space to get through things. You can do it really quickly. And again, it's how you design the process and outreach. So it ranges, could be 6 months. I use 1 year to 2 as kind of a frame. But I wouldn't want to commit until we know what the budget is and the scope of what the strategic plan would look like and have to encompass, right? So that's where, if this body is considering revamping the enabling legislation, it would be good to understand, okay, does that increase the current scope, or has it made it more specific? And if it's made it more specific, we could potentially tighten that time frame, you know, and make it more focused. It just really depends. But I'm just gonna say 2 years, 2 to 3 years. Okay. And that's
the legislature works in 2 years, or at least our body does. Okay, so that's a good answer. It's a good field number to be playing with. Thank you, Mr. Manuel. Let's go on to the next topic of questions. This may be a faster, we'll get through this faster, because I do then want to turn to the issues of Kauai as well as ongoing challenges on Oahu. Delegation of board authority came up in the audit, and our understanding from the documents that we received is that there was a 2008 delegation by the Board of Agriculture to the chair of the Board of Agriculture to act on behalf of the board. Is that your understanding about the delegation of authority from the Board of Agriculture and how they approve the plans and projects of ADC? I'll turn first to you, Ms. Evans, since you're a longer serving board member.
My understanding is that is to address the specific statutory requirement that the Board of Ag approve all development plans and facilities for ADC. So I think there's two different types of delegation. That one would be that the Board of Ag delegated its chair to represent it on the ADC board. That's the third ex officio member of the three ex officio members on the ADC board. And then the statute contains a delegation of authority by the board to the executive director for hiring staff. And then there have been several specific resolutions by the board delegating authority to the executive director for issues that have arisen. And then I have a personal opinion about, I strongly believe in delegating authority to the chair of agriculture, to the executive director of ADC, for routine de minimis types of approvals. In fact, I've probably been a pest on both those boards to try to get so that we're not, the board itself is not approving minor changes to tenant leases. Like, yes, you can build a fence, but you don't have to come to the board for it. That's not a conceptual example. It actually was an issue. And sometimes I'm successful in getting my fellow board members to agree, and we do a resolution of delegation.
Mr. Manuel, your understanding of the Board of Agriculture's delegation of authorities to the chair and then other authorities delegated to the executive director.
Yeah, I would mirror what Mariana, or agree with what Mariana said about that. My understanding of the delegation to the Board of Ag chairperson, as she sits as an ex officio, she or he sits as an ex officio member on ADC. And as Mariana's mentioned, it is routine for boards and commissions to delegate certain decisions, I would say, to, for example, on the commission, to the chairperson and even me as a deputy. So staff level to do that. And so in prior delegations, I don't think we've had a delegation while I've been on the board since 2019, but prior delegations had delegated some of those functions to the executive director to act on behalf of the board itself. I will say that usual delegations have limits or terms under which the delegation is granted by most boards and commissions. And if they don't meet those criteria established in the delegation, then usually it still would require board approval and or commission approval. And usually the safest thing to do is ask your attorney general whether or not that was explicitly delegated. And a lot of times they will advise us conservatively. And I'll speak out of personal, experience. It's better just, if you're unsure, just go to the board if you have the authority to do it. So that's been my understanding of delegation of authority from board to others, or in this case, the executive director.
Members, any questions on this area of delegation of authorities? Representative Tarnas.
Thank you. Did you get any orientation when you came on the board about these delegation of authorities that were already in place so that you would be aware?
I'll go first. So no, but I will say that, again, similar to other boards and commissions, and this one is relatively new compared to others. My experience even with Hawaiian Homes Commission or even the Commission on Water Resource Management, those aren't always explicitly shared in the orientation with our commissioners. So even with our commission, we don't necessarily go over every single thing that the prior commissions have delegated. Usually what ends up happening is in submittals that come before the commission, if there's we reference a delegation, or if something hasn't come before the commission, that'll come up. The question will come up from a commissioner or board members like, isn't this something we have control over? And then it's referenced by staff in other cases. Well, this has actually been delegated, and on this date, in this time, it's been delegated. But again, we always say, if the board chooses to withdraw or rescind its delegation, it has authority and power to do that at any time. and reevaluate that delegation.
But in this case, the ADC board wasn't the one delegating, it was the Board of Ag.
Yeah, specifically for the statutory, from what I understand, that from what I understand the statute, any ADC board would act, and then any plans or those programs or projects that are explicit would still have to get Board of Ag approval. In that case, that Board of Ag approval was what was delegated to the chair to act on. And
Yes.
how that happens in certain cases, it usually are explicit, like via board memo, or the chairperson is authorized to sign a permit. We're delegating it to the chair. You know, those are
Yes.
usually how you would delegate the
Right.
authority. Yeah.
Usually, yeah. Any comments, Mary Alice?
Yes, this is my personal opinion. I sit on the Board of Ag as well. It would be impossible for the Board of Agriculture to review with due diligence and approve every action taken by the ADC board and still get its own work done. So I support the arrangement that the chair of the Board of Ag has the authority to, she sits on the ADC board. She also chairs the Board of Ag. It gives her an opportunity to see if there's synergies, conflicts, or concerns in a way that I don't think the full Board of Ag would actually have that, the knowledge to do that. So I support the way that was arranged.
Okay, thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Quick follow-up on that, just because I am actually looking at the February 26, 2008 board minutes. It says that it was requested to put all the Board of Agriculture members on the mailing list to receive ADC minutes and to be placed on a Board of Agriculture agenda once a year for updates. As a member of the Board of Agriculture, have you seen that practice occur? Well, you would actually already receive the ADC. Have you seen the practice occurring where ADC would be placed on the agenda, the board agenda, once a year for updates?
No, I have not.
Okay, so maybe that's something we can follow up on.
Yeah.
Members, any other questions on this area of board delegation of authorities? Okay, I think the next area is to talk about specifically, because it's a board duty, the process of evaluating the executive director. And that was seen and brought up as a criticism in the audit. Since the audit, what has been the steps taken by the board to implement an evaluation process for the executive director?
First of all, I disagree with the audit's finding on this. In my 4 and 3 year stints on the board, there has been an annual evaluation of the executive director. Now, I have never been appointed to that. They used a pig to do that, which is actually more common than doing it as a committee of the whole. At least for other boards that I've sat on, but I have not been appointed to that committee, so I can't say what the process was, but I do know that it was reported back to the board by using the 3-meeting rule, and that the ADC board did have the opportunity to approve or disapprove the recommendations of the pre-minute interaction group. So in this case, I respectfully disagree with the state auditor's finding.
Mr. Manuel?
So I was part of the review of the executive director as part of the PIG for that prior to the audit. Moving forward, there were recommendations within that evaluation that the board accepted in executive session as part of the evaluation for the executive director. So there is a review, and there has been a review of the executive director's performance as of, I forget the time period, but we reviewed his performance during a certain period that we had to review. There's one that has to happen annually, But I haven't been part of anyone big since that one.
Any questions on this area? Representative Kobayashi and then Representative Perruso.
Thank you, Chair. So I wonder if you could elaborate. So you disagree with the evaluation of the executive director. If it were up to you, what would your evaluation have resulted in? Like an outstanding type of evaluation, or?
Representative, could you, yeah, I'm a little confused by your question. My apologies.
No, if you have a disagreement with the auditor's evaluation of the executive director, what do you think it should have been and why?
Oh,
Just
no, I
put it that way.
didn't. No, my disagreement was with his finding that the board had not conducted annual performance evaluations. I wasn't aware that he had reached a finding of that the Office of the Auditor disagreed with the board's annual evaluations. I think he reached a conclusion that the board hadn't been doing that, and that's what I'm just.
Yeah, that's not what I was really getting at. But what would be your evaluation of the executive director? Let me just put it that way.
You know, I agree with the rest of the board on the recommendation made by the Annual Performance Evaluation Committee.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go to Rep. Perruso next, but let me just clarify. So so we get the terminology correct. The auditor's finding was that the ADC board's lack of oversight allows the executive director to operate with little to no accountability. And it seems that the auditor is most interested in understanding what the performance measures are, and that the board has not established goals or performance measures for the executive director to fulfill. So maybe to expand on what Rep. Kobayashi has talked about, can you share with us what some of those performance measures or goals have been in the previous evaluations? And what are some of those performance measures and goals today? If that's something that can be shared with this committee.
So I will say that having served on the PIG, one of the basics is the position description that and the requirements to fulfill the position description obligations. That's one metric that we review, and whether or not and consistency with the statute and enabling legislation. Those are two bodies that we used. As part of the overall process, there was a process that we went through to evaluate and ask quantitative and qualitative questions. I will leave it at that. I don't know, because a lot of this is personal matters, like performance appraisals are usually personnel matters. As a deputy managing staff, those are done in confidence. But in general, those are some of the measures that I feel comfortable sharing publicly about the evaluation of the executive director's performance.
Representative Perruso?
Yeah, so just following up on that conversation, I thought it was strange that after the audit came out, the board moved to meeting once every 2 months. And I think the concern that the auditor expressed with respect to oversight had to do with the willingness of the board to provide oversight and check the executive director in everyday kinds of operations. So to direct his work and regulate his work. And not simply through the performance evaluation, but also through that interaction at the board meetings. So I found it troubling that the board moved to once every 2 months. and I've been assured by Myra that you will be returning to monthly meetings, and so I'm grateful for that. But I would say that this concern about the possibility that an all-volunteer board doesn't have the time or the energy or maybe the institutional background to really vet the actions being taken by the executive director. I think that it's possible that those concerns can be allayed by making the board meetings more transparent. So I found that having them accessible virtually over the period of COVID has been very useful. I would also recommend for consideration by the board, posting those meetings on YouTube so that they can be viewed later. I find that the minute summaries are inadequate and don't really capture the conversation. But I think it wasn't just about a performance evaluation necessarily, at least the way I read the report. It was really about, I think he was pointing to passivity of the board. So that is a concern. And I don't know if the board has talked about that, because when you had conversations about the audit, they were in executive session. So there wasn't any way to see, for the public to see how the board was grappling with the audit. And so that led to kind of additional conversations, right? So are you planning on having public board conversations about the audit?
I will defer to Chair Lau. I mean, he sets the agenda.
Yeah, that's fair.
And as the chair has the authority to do that. And
Yeah.
I will say that publicly when the audit came out, I did ask, we had recommended we should meet probably twice a month to address the concerns. Let's talk through it and work through it, develop priorities, what's first, what's second. So staff did kind of get on that and started to work through that. And then we met on the item and the matrix that was kind of developed in that process. So it is a priority, at least as an individual board member, I will say that audits help us to improve. And I look at them as constructive criticism of areas that we can always do better in. And I appreciate your comment about transparency and providing follow-up for community. I definitely see the value of providing videos and people can watch it at their own time. So I do find that as a benefit in this COVID pandemic that, I could come back and watch the hearings that you folks had. I didn't have to be here. So it was really helpful to kind of get the context of the conversations and what the board is discussing. So we can definitely encourage our chair to make those shifts.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Any more questions around this area about holding the executive director accountable, either through evaluations or ongoing oversight by the board? Okay. Seeing no questions on that, members, I have three kind of final topic areas to cover, which is questions about Kauai and the handling of Kauai, since that was a huge omission by the audit, and that several questions have been raised, as well as the ongoing challenges of on Oahu, on the Galbraith lands. And then some follow-up questions on just the audit process response, the opportunity to respond and the financial audits. So let's, I wanna use the last half hour time really wisely. Let's start with Kauai. And one of the things that we've learned through the documentation that we provided and the additional information provided by the ADC staff and executive director is that Kauai is really a large part of the portfolio and may prove to be both a model for some of the land management areas on other islands, but that it also has its own challenges. So from your perspective as a board member, Ms. Evans, can you just explain maybe what your takeaways are from ADC's oversight of Kauai lands, both as positive practices, and then what are some of the challenges that may not fit for the rest of the state?
There are two management models, as our annual report states. on Kauai. One is for Kekaha. And in that case, we engaged KAA to manage the water system. And then our land agent makes frequent trips to Kauai to try to resolve tenant problems. So, the other model is the Kalepa collection, most of which came over from DLNR, some of which had long-time tenants who live on the land and may not have a commercial agricultural approach. You know, they may be having, you know, the old time ranchers and things like that. There is always a transition when you, when Act 90, you know, is effectuated and lands come over from DLNR, because DLNR, you know, has a different land management strategy or plan, you know, and so as I understand, the Kalepa tenants have formed their own coalition, and they have been attempting to remediate some of the infrastructure, common infrastructure that has was not attended to for many decades. I find KAA to be, at this point in time, very responsive on the water system. As you all know, this is one of those areas where there are multiple demands for the water system to also serve as pump hydro for renewable energy for KIUC, which is a terrific idea. We could repeat it on the Big Island where you have a significant drop. It would also help with, you know, reaching our renewable energy goals. But again, that competition for land. And then the Kekaha area is also a sea level rise risk. It already has salt intrusion, and that makes it very hard to farm anything but salt resistant varieties. And it has regular flooding. So it's a huge challenge. But I like, because the ADC staff is really too small to do active day-to-day land management on Kauai, having the model that they've adopted, KAA, has been, I think, the best possible model for that area. Does that help?
That helps me. Mr. Manuel, because you're so much newer to the board, what's your observations at this point for Kauai and how the board is handling Kauai issues?
Yeah, being new, I will say that the way that the board has organized and is managing water, it's similar to how we have internal water team to manage by AUDIT. In this case, we've outsourced that function, right? And so I think there's strategies both ways and benefits of, you know, building capacity internally and or outsourcing. So in this case on Kauai, the model is we utilize an agreement with KAA to help us manage our water systems. In that the most recent conversation presentation from KAA in the work that they've been doing to upgrade the systems and improve efficiencies and meter and gauge, which comes with my other hat, which is part of the Waimea Watershed Agreement that they agreed to do. They've also indicated kind of this desire to be more actively involved in how lands are utilized or even land management in that context. And so I know the board is kind of is open to including or expanding KAA's kind of kuleana to include maybe potentially, you know, assisting the agency with land management activities. What that is and what that entails, we don't know yet. But that is one model. Again, I think the statute gives the ADC the ability to engage in these contractual, you know, opportunities, agreements with public and private entities. And I think where it works, you know, we should continue to look at ways to make that function. I do think that reporting and annual good communication is key to any of those kind of agreements. And building that into the agreement, like annual, presentations before the board is something that will ensure that we're not completely delegating our responsibility to oversee, manage land and water.
So before I turn to other questions, one area of concern I had was that much like in the other part of this investigative committee, we're looking at SLDF and DLNR having these long-term licenses, leases, revocable permits. Just as you described a sea change in the agricultural economy from when sugar transitioned out, my sense is that we are in another period of large change potentially, and that seed corn companies, which is the bulk of the primary tenants in the KAA association, may be looking at other things, hence your description that they may be looking to get involved in more land management and diversifying, with other tenants. So my question would be, I was concerned when we saw public reports of lands being abandoned on Kauai. What has been the strategy of ADC to deal with maybe companies that might be exiting? Are you aware of what the long-term plans may be? Has any concerns about remediation clauses within these long-term licenses ever been brought to your attention? Or are we not in that situation? So if you could just comment maybe broadly on some of the of any of these concerns that have been raised. We're kind of now digging more into the weeds of it, right? But this is serious because if we are going to see large changes, it may happen first in KAA, and that has huge implications because then if lands are in fact abandoned, then ADC has more responsibility. So what have been the conversations around the management of Kauai lands on this issue? And I'll start with you first, Mary, since you're longest serving.
So these matters do come to the board. It's my opinion that the staff makes every effort to help a tenant that has apparently abandoned their license to cure the violations and to become current in terms of preparing the land, planting it, and producing. That isn't always successful. And I see the staff looking at their successful tenants, their successful farmers, and seeing if they want to take over lands that a tenant has essentially abandoned. And that has been a strategy. If you're a successful farmer you can often be a successful farmer on larger parcels too, because you have the business sense to know what it takes to be a successful farmer. We occasionally, the board sees that there are tenants who are more optimistic than pragmatic, and they think that they can become a farmer. And then they discover it's hard, extremely hard. And then, but they aren't always forthcoming. And sometimes it takes considerable effort on the part of the land manager to get them to realize that they're not going to be successful. And so the board often gives some extensions to, if they come and they sincerely say, no, I'm gonna, I've already started clearing, I'm gonna do better, I'm gonna get those junk cars off of, the property, that kind of thing. But at the end, the staff will recommend termination of the license and bring somebody with a better successful track record forward. So that's been my experience.
Mr. Manuel?
Yeah, maybe just to riff off and add, it has been in the 2 years that I've been on the board, kind of the policy to try to not leave lands vacant as soon as possible, try to find a tenant. And usually it's reaching out to the adjoining tenants to say, hey, we are potentially moving forward with canceling a license, and would you be willing to take on this kuleana? And then we've been lucky, I guess, to do that. I did have a question with the board and brought it up as a policy statement of, do we want to provide opportunities for new tenants and encourage new agribusiness? And do we know the market and whether or not there's a desire to want to get in line? How long is the line? And so I just raised that as a question, but the current policy is not to let lands go fallow or vacant for long periods of time, because then we have all of the other ancillary issues that come with that. Kind of one of the items that you brought up was conditions of licenses or returning of lands. I think in most state contracts or licenses or like leases, there's a reversion clause that requires lands to be returned to the original state. And in other cases, when I was at DHL, we had if it was used for agriculture, for example, or was in former sugar or pineapple, there was a phase 1 environmental assessment required as an exit strategy. To ensure that we get lands back that are then still farmable, right, for the next tenant, and we're not taking on that burden as an agency. So tying into that, I think climate change, uncertainty and building in conditions within licenses. For example, like if you're reliant on stream water, we don't know if streams are going to be continuing to flow at the rates that they're currently flowing. So you may have times when you don't have access to water. And so being very upfront with tenants about some of the unknowns, so we don't potentially, put the state in a contractual obligation that it cannot meet based on resource availability, I think is something that we collectively, all agencies really need to kind of focus in on now.
I'm gonna open up the questions. I know Rep Hashem is on Zoom. He may have some questions, but we'll let him come back on. There he is, Rep Hashem.
No, you continue on. Chair, you're asking my questions prior to me asking, so you can continue.
Okay, Representative.
You already asked all the questions that I wanted to ask, so thank you.
Thank you. Representative Kobayashi, any questions on this issue of any of the Kauai lands?
Yeah, just one thing that I hear a lot when you're talking about goals of what should be applied on Kauai or anything else for the agency. There are a number of different goals that I've heard here. And I think when you look at the charter of ADC in particular, it's fairly clear what it's set up for and what the objectives are. There's also been inserted personal opinions about theories of climate change as being important to observe. And do you see any potential conflict between that advocacy and your mission for ADC and protecting or really advocating for a forward type of thinking to create better conditions for agriculture for the people of Hawaii, and your opinions on climate change theory?
Oh, okay. Thank you, Representative. No, I think as our awareness of the potential impacts of climate change on Hawaii, specifically in our ag lands, it's going to focus on heat stress, water availability, and the need to worry about flooding, sea level rise, and saltwater intrusion in our lower lying areas. Now, Keikaha is a lower lying area, except for the pump storage plan, which goes all the way up to Kokei, close to. But no, I see what I'm learning about climate change as a really helpful piece of information that I can bring to ADC so that we anticipate the challenges that our farmers will be facing as we get more storms, more flooding in some of the leeward areas, wildfires, and heat stress, which I don't think we've really, that one is, it's a more nebulous one. It's easier to map sea level rise, as UH has done so well, projections. Heat stress is going to affect our outdoor laborers. It's going to cause, we're going to have to make changes to make sure that their health is not challenged.
Sorry, I wasn't really asking about this. Sorry to cut you off, but I wasn't really asking about sea level rise. I was asking about climate change, right? So what you're describing are effects of sea level rise, which is local and relevant, obviously, to what we're talking about. I don't think anybody would argue not. But you've also mentioned your theories on sustainability and carbon footprint, which is not sea level rise. This is climate change theory that we're talking about. And our small contribution here in Hawaii to that global carbon situation. So if you could address that and not sea level rise, that's really what I was trying to get at.
So the legislature established the the carbon farming task force that the Office of Planning had, was given to the Office of Planning. And we looked at the role that carbon offsets might play in supporting planting native trees and using that to fund some of DLNR's program costs. Our consultant did a very thorough study on that and found that Hawaii would not be able to monetize its tree planting efforts, which should go ahead anyway, because we do need to plant more trees to both absorb carbon and to, especially in urban areas, which is not the subject of ADC, but urban areas to reduce heat stress for human habitation. I think that awareness of all the different impacts that climate change will bring is going to be helpful to ADC and how it works to support its tenants, and a recognition that yes, that salt intrusion and flooding can devastate farmers. This is, the old saying is that, weather determines whether farmers are successful. Well, weather is getting much more extreme, and that's going to make it harder for farmers. And so our role as a state is to be able to support those farmers. And that's going to become, I think, more important with climate change.
Okay, so if you just take as a given that link between carbon emissions and sea level rise and those effects, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative.
Representative Yamashita, Representative Tarnas.
Yes, just a question. Kaleo, you brought up, and usually in leases, you've got this reversionary clause, right? If it comes back, especially if it was ag, you would have a phase 1 environmental assessment done. Do you know whether those were included in the Kauai licenses? And if they were not, why not?
I don't know. A lot of the licenses were issued prior to me getting on the board. I don't know if Mariana says any.
No, I don't know if that's the case. It would be a best practice. And thank you for raising that point. And Kaleo and I will raise that with our fellow board members as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Just to follow up on that, I think it is really important because as we look at the tenant list that was provided by ADC, our understanding is that the MOA has been extended. So and then separate tenants have also extended, but some of the expiration dates for some of the licenses are as early as 2022. I believe that is the right of entry for KIUC. And then that's tied up in, of course, all of the potential water projects and water agreements. So while we understand that it's not the board's place to micromanage, these are the big questions that would seem to rise to the level of the board, and that we hope that you folks are engaged in those conversations, especially if there is a sea change that occurs within the tenants, and it seems like there isn't, and it seems like there is a stabilization, and then there is a commitment from some of the primary tenants to stay longer. But we'll also explore that when we have KAA here on Thursday. So Rep. Perruso, any questions related to Kauai?
I do. First, following up on Rep. Tarnas's question around the phase 1 of the environmental assessments that's usually written in. So I've been reading those licenses and I have not seen any of that language in the original licenses. So I'm wondering if it's possible to go back and revisit those license agreements and insert that language, or if that requires additional negotiation. I'm not sure. That's something for us to consider. But then I wanted to go in a slightly different direction. So I don't know if you've seen, but I've been asking questions surrounding ceded land revenue. And because the bulk of the land under the control of ADC is ceded land, I was wondering first if all of the board members have undergone the training from Kahuliao, the Center for Excellence in Hawaiian Law, Native Hawaiian Law, on the ADC board. Have all the members had that training? Do you know, to your knowledge? I can also ask the chair.
Yeah, I don't know, but I have
Okay.
personally gone through the training.
I've done it twice and it's been very, very helpful.
Okay, thank you. And then my follow-up question with respect to that is, are there conversations? I didn't see any conversations in the board minutes, but maybe they're happening in executive session. Are you having conversations around the revenue from those ceded lands and its allocation? Because the practice in DLNR, we've been told, is that the remainder, other than OHA, goes back to DLNR. And it looks like when ADC does contribute ceded land revenues to OHA, which is not always, then they are also keeping the remainder. So I'm wondering if you have conversations about how that revenue is allocated.
The one, I will just opine on one thing is when coming onto the board, one of the recommendations I made was to create consistency with submittal templates, similar to DLNR other agencies. And one of the line items is DHL entitlement. I haven't seen a ceded lands qualification there, but that could be something that is added in order to track and better manage. So I thank you for the question. I think it's something we should focus on in terms of our obligation as a board.
I agree. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, any further questions on the Kauai lands? I think my other questions will be better directed towards the KAA since they have more subject matter knowledge of the Kauai lands. Questions about ongoing challenges on Oahu, on any of the Oahu findings? I'm gonna look to the Zoom cameras, and if nothing is moving, I'm going to actually go straight to Representative Perruso because she has some questions. Go ahead, Representative Perruso.
So I wanted to talk briefly about, well, connecting actually Kauai and Oahu management. And because so much of my community's consternation about management of the Whitmore lands has to do with the pattern of management on Kauai and not just around water resources, which Kaleo is your forte, but also around pesticide use. And I think that I am concerned about the extent to which the use of pesticides creates a liability for the state. And if you have considered that when you are looking at applicants for licenses, if the increased risk that their practices pose to the state is something that you consider when you're evaluating, you know, I saw in this last round, you had about 9 applicants for each of the 6 parcels on, you know, in Whitmore. And is that something that you take into consideration, their practices and the liability they might pose for the state?
I did not sit on that permitted interaction group. So when the full board was reviewing the recommendation, I did not see a mention of that.
Yeah, likewise, I didn't. And that wasn't presented in the submittal. And it wasn't an explicit criteria, I don't think, that was considered in weighting, at least within what was presented to the board. I don't know if within the interviews or site visits. Those were questions that were raised, proximity to adjoining neighbors and potential pesticide drift or other factors.
Okay. Can I just do a quick follow-up on that? What is the permitted interaction group that would have been?
It was the
Designated.
review of the
Tenant
land
application.
licensing review committee. So they're the ones that review they develop the RFP, they send it out, they get applications, they review it, they rank them, they do site visits, and then they come up with recommendations. And so I think just last month or in the month before, September, October, there were recommendations of who for the Galbraith lands, right? And some of the Mililani lands, who are the top ranking awardees. And then this coming month, I think we're supposedly approving licenses. So this could be something that we have a conversation with the whole board about.
I think the members appointed to that particular permitted interaction group were the out of the 8 private sector members who are farmers. And so the idea was tapping their expertise for what could be done to get people farming those lands so that don't remain vacant, but in a way that meets ADC's mission. So I'm not a farmer.
Right. No, and thank you. I appreciate that answer. And then my final question also connects the two, because in both areas, there's discussion about food hubs. And most recently at our neighborhood board, we had a presentation about the ADC's plans for the new food hub in Whitmore. And I know that there's also discussion about the use of a building that Bex is seeking to sell to the Department of Education for use as a food hub or some related kind of facility. And so I was wondering, is there a strategic plan around ADC working within a broader approach to food hubs that the Department of Agriculture is developing, or are these just isolated kinds of opportunity moments?
No, I think this is part of a broader discussion about the federal food safety requirements that are now being imposed on farmers and how our smaller farmers don't have the economies of scale to fund the food safety packaging requirements. And so creating a food hub will allow our smaller farmers to be able to sell their products in a legal way to beyond just say a roadside stand or something that avoids the federal food safety requirements. I think it's essential that we create food hubs. Now, the other part of that plan is actually following up on a legislative initiative to have state agencies that have large purchases of food pivot to buying local food as opposed to buying frozen food from the mainland, like the Department of Education. And that's part of ADC's role to create a market for our tenants, for agriculture.
And I appreciate that response, but I'm wondering, because it seems to me that the approach in Whitmore is very, very privatized. So you're waiting for a private partner who will come in and build the infrastructure for the food hub. You're basically floating the concept and doing the design. And then, so I was wondering how that kind of fits together with a state plan that, is run and we provide oversight and regulation of.
I believe we're going to do it by following procurement rules to the letter, which will mean it'll be a competitive procurement.
I don't really have anything to add to that. I'm food hub. I generally understand the concept and support the intent. I don't know what the pros and cons are of the public-private partnership approach, design build, or if it's fully state build, because of the other requirements that state funding and state
Yeah,
permitting has. So
I
I
appreciate
haven't
that.
reviewed that, so I can't.
Yeah, that's fine. And I think it's complicated. So thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Chair.
Any other questions on this area? Actually, I'm very interested in this because, and this is where I think maybe ADC, because it's not baked in to your enabling statute, ADC is actually maybe getting ahead of the game, because one of the things that we're learning is that food hubs are actually going to be the way to assist, as you said, smaller farmers to be able to access the market. But I guess the concern is that as the food hubs get placed in different areas, and I think there's actually a concern about Kauai becoming a food hub, and that there might be contractual things occurring that just actually don't make sense yet. So again, ADC getting ahead of itself. Has there been discussions about a food hub, or can you share with us the conversations about a food hub processing facility developed on the Kauai lands?
I don't recall. And then again, it could have been discussed maybe when I was absent at a certain meeting. So I don't recall food hub being presented on Kalapa or Kekaha.
Yeah, I don't either for Kauai. The one I'm aware of is the one on Central Oahu.
Yeah, Whitmer.
And it was my understanding that they were talking about the facility, the BEX facility, that the DOE was asking to purchase as both an educational space and also as a food hub.
So I think community colleges wants to do an educational facility. DOE wants to create a centralized kitchen that can incorporate a local product, local vegetables and fruits into their regular breakfast and lunch meals. And they have, as Randy Tanaka explains, their cafeteria staff in their schools are not trained chefs. They are, they are very good at preparing frozen foods, but what the DOE would like to do to fulfill its obligation to purchase more local agricultural products is to create a centralized kitchen that would serve their Central and Leeward complexes.
Yeah, I apologize. That was discussed. So again, terminology goes like this if in certain things, but yeah, I recall that presentation by Randy.
And that's fine. I think it's a huge facility. So I think the food hub was just part of it. But I think the question that emerges around that facility is that if BEX is leaving, right, it's infrastructure that they created, but if they are leaving, then the question arises as to why the state would expend an additional $5 million to buy back a building that will already be on our land. So that's kind of like where I was headed a little bit with that question, but.
Thank you for mentioning that.
Any other questions on Oahu challenges, Oahu lands? I know that security continue. This will be my final question on Oahu lands. Security is, we learned, an issue actually on both larger parcels, both Kauai and Oahu. With the recent fires, but not commenting on the fires, are you confident as board members that the ADC staff have a plan that can work to address the ongoing security issues and concerns? And has the appropriate partnerships with whatever enforcement groups need to help?
There's been significant discussion at the board on getting farmers onto those vacant lands so that their presence will discourage homeless people, car theft specialists, and others from taking the opportunity of vacant lands to do illegal things and things that threaten the community. So that's one strategy, and we've discussed it pretty clearly, and there's a consensus that the faster we can get those, active tenants, and I emphasize active, on those lands, less likely it'll be that those lands will be opportunistically used for illegal activities. Now that we have a land agent located in the Whitmore complex, I think there's probably been a faster response when a community member notices something and says something to Lyle Rowe, our land agent up there, and he's not a policeman, so he does call the HPD when it's something is reported that is actively going on, or he observes something that is actively going on. ADC does not have the equivalent of DoCare, which is what DLNR has for continuous enforcement of, in their case, a whole range of illegal activities on conservation land. It's kind of too small to have its own police force, and I think that would be. So I think the other strategy that we came up with, which is to make sure that we have no vacant lands, get people, active farmers on there as quick as possible, is probably the best we can do with the limited resources we have. We can't count on fires to clear brush and then we can't count on Schnitzer Steel to always come up and say for free, we're going to haul the, burned out cars away. Boy, was that a lucky thing. I hadn't thought of Schnitzer Steel in that positive light for a while, and delighted to see that was able to work out. And then, of course, the next step is finding out what kinds of hazardous materials may have soaked into the ground from that fire. This will be a continuing challenge. There's, as I've said, my personal view is there's a huge pressure on the state's ag district, and not just ADC's lands, but all of them, for a wide range of things, subsistence farming, but also illegal activities. And, I think the board will, have to continue to keep up with I expect the criminals will figure out ways to get around our strategy, because they're smart too, some of them, and that we will have to continue to find new ways to deal with it, with those problems, because they affect the communities that we're in. And we'll do our very best.
Okay, anything to add, Mr. Manuel? Any final questions, members? And then we are at, we're a little bit over noon. I apologize for that. I did have some follow-up questions on the audit process as well as financial audits. Yes.
So you were going to ask, I just wanted to ask one question on the audit process.
I will defer to Representative Tarnas for the audit process question.
It's just, I wanted to, in the audit, the auditor said that he had offered to meet with the board for an entrance conference to explain the purpose of the audit, the process and expectations, but the board declined the offer. And then the auditor said we provided a draft audit report to the board members at the same time as provided to the executive director. We received communication from one member, but were not informed the board was interested in participating in the exit conference or otherwise to discuss the audit. Was there any discussion at the board about this, and why wouldn't the board want to meet with the auditor?
I don't recall any discussion about that. It's been my experience, having had the wonderful opportunity to be audited a number of times for other programs in DBED, that the entrance conference is held with staff, the staff that's going to be audited, and it's helpful. And then at the exit audit, I recall presenting the state auditor and his staff with areas that we disagree with their findings and recommendations, and try to provide them with the additional information we think that they should take into account. those have always been cordial meetings. They've always been with staff. So that's, my experience. And then we have the opportunity to write a rebuttal letter. And I have always taken that very seriously because it's our opportunity to tell the legislature and the public what we agree with and what we disagree with in the audit. And we always find, both of those things, is in my experience.
Your experience has been the staff level that has been interacting with the auditor, not the board. I see. Okay.
Yeah, likewise, when I was at DHL, the chair and staff would engage with the auditor. And then the chair would present something to the board eventually, but the initial start didn't really involve the whole board. I don't really also recall being, involved or asked or presented to about the audit when it was starting. So again, could have been lost in emails or at a meeting that I wasn't present at, but I don't personally recall.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Would it be accurate to say that if you did meet with the auditor, then that would have to become a publicly noticed meeting because it would be a convening of the entire board?
Correct.
So actually the request, because I think I recall with the ADC audit, you literally had between December 29th and January 8th to respond. So it in fact would have been an impossibility for the board to meet with the auditor given that time frame.
It would be extremely challenging because you need 6 days to post and then the agenda, like you would have had to post on the 29th and then probably convened on the 5th or 6th, if that worked, in order to, meet sunshine law requirements.
Okay, so maybe that's a misunderstanding on the auditor's part as well, that he needs to also comply with laws like all of us do. Okay, any other questions about process?
Yeah, I do.
Go ahead.
So you say that you didn't really have any recollection of them, the auditor asking for this meeting yet. You do remember the dates related to that as being that 2-week period that you felt was unreasonably short or?
Excuse me, I was the one who prompted them with the timing.
Okay. Was any effort made to engage the auditor on this? That your concerns about not having enough time?
Well, the auditor, in my experience, has an annual cycle, and they normally finish their draft reports for the year in the fall, and then they make them available. It's a very formal process. They make them available to the staff, hold that exit interview, and then give the staff a deadline by which to submit their rebuttal letter, which is always attached at the end as an appendix to every audit. So I don't recall whether there was a request for an extension of that deadline, or even if that would have been. I don't believe that extensions are the norm for that short period of time. The staff scrambles, to put together the rebuttal letter.
I guess it just is this. So the auditor, contacted the board to ask if you would like the consideration of going over the audit findings before the report is issued. And I just don't see the point of contention and criticism here that what exactly was the problem with this request in your mind? I just kind of missing why this is a huge problem.
Okay, I was not aware that there was a request that the board meet with the auditor. I was aware that the staff participated in the exit interview, which is standard operating procedure for state audits. So it wouldn't have occurred to me to even question whether there had been an invitation to the board, because as far as I know, that isn't a usual part of the standard audit procedure.
So even though you didn't recall that, you still have concerns about public notice on a meeting that you didn't remember being proposed.
Yes, the only way that the auditor could have met, pigs have to be created at duly noticed sunshine meetings of a board. So they also can't be scrambled together in a, unless there happened to be a board meeting that fell in that period. In our case, that wasn't the case.
Okay, so your concern was more that theoretically, if he did have a request for a meeting that you heard about, that he should have done some public notice, but you don't recall a meeting that he had this awful transgression at. That it was just something that you're just bringing up as something that could have happened. If he did, then he would be in the wrong because he didn't do a public notice on it.
Okay, let me interject here.
Based on your knowledge of the rules and not really anything that you remember happening.
Let me interject here. Representative Kobayashi, it's actually my concern that the agency was set up to fail by being asked to conduct a meeting with the auditor in a time frame that made it legally impossible for them to meet. And then they were criticized. So it is my concern that I'm raising, and that what I'm hearing from the testimony is that it's not standard operating procedure for, in fact, board members to meet with the auditor. Now, if the auditor chooses to make that as part of his standard operating procedures, then that should be made clear to the auditees at some point in time, and then that they be afforded the proper notice days in which they can then meet that now new expectation, if that is in fact an expectation of the office of the auditor.
So that
question should maybe be directed towards me and not to the testifiers, who that's not their criticism. What they're saying is that in their experience, it was not standard operating procedures for boards to discuss the audit reports with the office of the auditor. That is normally the staff.
Of course, but
okay.
You had agreement with that, Mary Alice in particular, right? That was, you agree completely with that.
Yeah, we were not informed that there was an invitation. We wouldn't have been able to respond to one within the time frame had we been informed there was an invitation. And therefore, we couldn't have complied with that unless we had been given way advance notice, which we could then have scheduled a board meeting and made it an agenda item. That would have taken more notice than we were normally given to do a rebuttal letter.
I guess I just don't see why this is an issue. That, he comes up with findings, he contacts the board to, see if they would like to know about the findings he's had on the agencies that you oversee. And somehow this is like a big issue, right? I mean, it's just really fairly simple. And I think it's good that they would contact you and want you to know. And I would think you would want to know what they found. And it's really just a courtesy. And for this to be criticized is really just confusing.
Well, thank you, Representative Kobayashi. I will just say, though, that was an issue that was raised in the audit report. It was commented on by both the auditor and then in follow-up. And then we've had questions about that process as well. So that's why we're asking it, because we're simply following up as we're tasked to do by the resolution in this committee. So it may be a fair criticism. It may be something that we just need to fix for future audits, because I do think that there might be, in fact, value to the auditor speaking with the board, but perhaps there needs to be an understanding of what are the requirements of the board in which they can respond. I think that's simply where the line of questioning is going, Representative Kobayashi.
Right, and my comment is just that, yeah, you should be happy about it, that you would know everything brought out about the board, about the agency that you oversee. That's all.
Okay, this has been very productive. We will be speaking with Mr. Lau, who's the current board chair, tomorrow, as well as representatives from KAA. Thank you very much, Mr. Manuel and Ms. Evans, for your time. I apologize that we went a little bit over schedule. I don't believe that we're going to be recalling you back, but there is now the option for you to always be notified when there are going to be other witnesses, as well as you will be able to provide any proposed questions. And you will also be getting links to any future meetings of this committee so that you can Zoom in or YouTube in at your preference. Thank you again. Members, there being no further business before this committee, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.